May Jesus be praised and onward with Mary. A good and holy day to all you dear children in the sacred hearts of Jesus and Mary, and in the most chaste heart of Saint Giuseppe. Welcome back to our morning feature, Saints and Coffee. Today is Friday, the 7th of February. The Church celebrates, in the ancient rite that we follow, the traditional one, that of the Reform, the last one, of John the 23rd before. Then of the great conciliar Reform, the feast of Saint Romuald, a monk. It is said in this morning's readings that, dying even very old, all those who met him were edified by the serenity and the joy of his face. We can ask ourselves if we too are like this. All of us, each of us at home, in the family, in the convent, in the monastery and church, everywhere. We are, if others can see it in us. The joy of faith, as seen in Saint Romuald, who was a monk, yet he had this light on his face, which is a characteristic of many saints. But also today we celebrate the liturgical memory, the happy memory of Blessed Pope Pius IX, a forgotten pope, but actually very important in the modern era. He was pope for 32 years. He became pope very young, of Senegalia, and proclaimed the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. He was also the pope who went into exile in Gaeta, and you have to be aware for the first time of the whole very problematic issue, the Roman question with the breach of Porta Pia and all the Risorgimento issues of the unification of Italy. The loss of the Papal States, in short, a real revolution in the 19th century, in the second half of the 19th century. Which is this: Holy Father, you always have to face with great difficulty. I have to tell you about a particular incident. I hardly ever dream special dreams, but a few years ago, without knowing this man's story, let me tell you something surprising. Whenever Pius IX is mentioned, I always remember this autobiographical event. Take it as you will, but it comes to mind, and I'll tell you, because we're all full of these things in our personal history. We can always tell these stories. So one night I dream of an elderly bishop, paunchy even from behind, and in the sacristy. He was already wearing his pontifical robes and was probably preparing to celebrate Mass or something like that. And I didn't understand who he was, but one detail struck me. He had a curious mark on his head, either from a cut or from a wound, and indeed it was luminous. Anyway, the dream ended there. Then I woke up, but this I'm talking about several years ago, right? And then later, after a while, I was able to read the life of Saint Maceus. FEDE, Giovanni Massai, FEDE Pius IX, today's feast. And I discovered, to my great surprise, that as a child, he had suffered from epileptic fits. So truly the Lord never ceases to amaze us. The Santos Road is for everyone. He started off disqualified because, someone who has epileptic fits, well, apart from the fact that he overcomes them, then he was truly miraculously healed. Apparently, he becomes Pope. But who knows how much he must have had to struggle with this personal fear of always having to avoid stressing himself too much. But by the Pope, who was Pope for 32 years, someone who had suffered as a young man, as a child, and as an adolescent with epileptic seizures. And immediately when I read that story there, I remembered the dream. So I understood that it was presumably a dream about Pius IX, and that luminous wound indicated precisely the suffering he had as a child. That is, epileptic fits, which are nothing to sneeze at. Epilepsy, by the way, also borders on the natural and the supernatural. More often than not, who knows, maybe he too suffered these infantile attacks of the devil, and that's why he paid the price with epilepsy. Then he recovered. He was elected pope at a time when people were hoping for the election of a liberal pope, open to reforms. In reality, then, gradually, Pius IX will convert and become the pope of guardian of the faith. His greatest merit, without a doubt, was finally, just imagine, finally, after centuries of disputes. Among these blessed Dominicans and Franciscans, the Franciscans, cultivators and defenders of the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, with John Duns Scotus, the Dominicans' opponents, in a naturally not harsh way, opponents of the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. There. And Pius IX has the courage, once and for all, when other pontiffs, not one or two but several, dozens of pontiffs hadn't had it, that is, to proclaim Mary Immaculate. It is said that on that famous 8th of December, 1854, the Pope proclaimed the dogma. In St. Peter's Basilica, it was a dark, rainy day. Suddenly, a light reached him and illuminated him completely. And then 4 years later, Our Lady in Lourdes on the 11th of February, which we will celebrate in a few days, of 1858, 4 years later, comes to confirm that the dogma was a good thing. You must make the Pope suffer greatly with everyone, as is typical of Holy Fathers. Suffer with everyone, Pope. Conservatives and traditionalists considered him a liberal enemy for years. Liberals for years. Then even they, even worse, allied themselves with the Freemasons, who'd wanted the unification of Italy. And those things there, the Risorgimento, the attack on the church, they targeted him relentlessly. I'll tell one story today, then finish. When Pope Pius IX died, he was in great danger. He had been the longest-lived pope in history. Even today he is, because John Paul II was pope, compared to him only, quote-unquote, 26 years. Whereas he was, remarkably, for 32 years. Dad, 32 years from 1846 to 1878, so a long, troubled period. When he died, he'd asked to be buried in the Basilica di San Lorenzo al Verano, and his body remains there. As a student in Rome, I sometimes went, and he's buried there. His body is incorrupt. If you search on the internet, you can see many pictures of this. Pope Pius IX. The body is incorrupt. But there's an episode that few know because it's embarrassing. When he dies and is laid out and on his deathbed, and then they carry his body in procession towards San Lorenzo al Verano, something unpleasant happens. The liberals, allied with the Freemasons and the supporters of Italian unification, organized a raid. So shortly thereafter, Pius IX's body was nearly thrown into the Tiber to be swept away. It was only by divine providence that this sacrilege against the Holy Father's body was prevented. The mortal remains of the Holy Father, which, as a sign of holiness, rest there in the crypt of the Basilica of St. Lawrence, at Verano Cemetery, next to the large monumental cinerary urn, and his body is incorrupt. Pius IX, in his will, had given specific instructions for his burial. He had written that his body, once deceased, be buried in the church of San Lorenzo fuori le mura, specifically beneath the small arch existing against the so-called gridiron. That is, the stone on which even now the marks produced by the martyrdom of the illustrious Levite, St. Lawrence, are visible. The thickness of the monument, etc., etc. Outside the modest monument, a tiara will be seen sculpted, and here you see precisely the urn with the mortal remains, there at San Lorenzo al Verano, of Blessed Pius IX, the Pope of the Immaculate Conception. What an honor he has to be able to boast eternally before the throne of God. Of this title, the Pope of the Immaculate, the Pope of Mary, without doubt, Pope Pius IX, the Blessed. Pius IX, who performed several miracles. Some are also depicted. There, if I remember correctly, at San Lorenzo. Well, if there aren't a lot of things to say today, let's move on. So this evening at 9 o'clock, there's the Rosary, with the foot pilgrims and the families, in this year of 2025, dedicated to the Rosary. God willing, an interesting episode, because we'll connect with a family from Melbourne, Australia. In Australia, let's hope the connection with our directors and 𝐥'𝐞 collaborators works. But this evening, we have the Rosary prayer scheduled with the pioneers and a family who will call, God willing, from Australia, from Melbourne. So I'm expecting you all. Let's pray intensely in this moment where the world is immersed in epochal passages under everyone's eyes. Last night was the Apocalypse episode. It was chapter 19, very interesting. I hope you found it interesting. We're moving forward. We've now reached chapter 10 of the Apocalypse. Last night we spoke about the sixth trumpet, chapter 9, which was the dominant theme. Then we introduced chapter 10 with the mighty angel. If you missed it, find it on the Radio Domina Nostra playlist. Nourish yourselves with good catechesis, clear, crystalline, without the pollution of the false church and the Word of God, which we abundantly comment on Radio Domina Nostra. You can find it there. It's Good Friday, Flowers Mary. I remind you of the two commitments that all the little remnant is called to live. First, silence from meat. Today we don't eat meat or its byproducts to honor the Lord's passion. Please don't eat meat and make it known that you're doing it, when asked, to honor the Lord's passion. This is the first commitment. The second is that of the bio-exercise of the way of the cross. We adore Jesus. On the cross, dying for us, we adore the Lord who gives his life to save us. Behold, let us contemplate him on the cross, even when we pray the Holy Rosary. On Fridays, whenever possible, we kiss the Holy Cross more often to worship the Lord who dies for us. And so too on Fridays, and so also on Friday. We can think of offering our sufferings to the Lord to keep us united to his passion. You know that today is also the first Friday of the month, and therefore the practical way of the first 9 Fridays of the month. It is to adore the Sacred Heart of Jesus and offer him worthy reparation for the ingratitude and indifference of the world that sadly we see present around us. Let us be careful never to fall into lukewarmness. We must always be full of love for the Lord, and if the Lord allows trials for us, it's because he wills it. He wants the fire of his love to invade our soul, and this transire per igno, and passing through the fire many times, involves suffering. Let us accept it without ever complaining excessively, welcoming everything from the hands of God, just as the Lord allows it, with that luminous and joyful face that is spoken of today on the feast of St. Romuald. Tomorrow we are in Genoa, the 8th of February. We are in the city of Genoa. At the Holiday Inn at 4 p.m., there will be this prayer meeting. Please don't miss it. Via Milano 47 in Suncorda. Come on, faithful of the small Ligurian remnant, we're waiting for you at 4 p.m. There will be ample opportunity for confession. And then, after the Rosary, the entrustment to Our Lady in the Holy Mass. Then tomorrow evening, since today is Friday, and tomorrow, therefore, there's no saints and coffee, I remind you of tomorrow evening's event. With the series of catechesis, Little Great Heroes of Faith. They asked me to put them, in summary, in a book, let's see, because I'm working on the second volume of a commentary on the Gospel of John, The Eagle and the Sun. These are books you can request. They're available from the Secretariat, and tomorrow evening we'll be talking about a rather significant figure, beatified by Benedict XVI, an 18-year-old of an era, a young man of an era, a young man obtained, Zeffirino Namuncurà. There he is, the Indian face, if we can say that, of this Salesian boy from the second generation, who will be brought to Italy by one of Don Bosco's first collaborators because he's suffering from tuberculosis. And he was Argentinian. Tomorrow evening we'll talk about him. Of Little Great Heroes of Faith, slowly draws to a close. We'll obviously start another column instead of this one. Tomorrow I'll see you at 9 p.m. For this episode, titled Blessed Zeffirino Namuncurà, who comes into contact with Don Bosco's first collaborators, he very nearly doesn't meet him because he arrives in Italy at the end of the 19th century, and it's all still very recent. He also met Pope Pius IX, speaking of coincidences. I think it was Pius IX, or maybe not, I don't quite remember, perhaps Leo XIII, but yes, definitely Leo XIII. Tomorrow evening we'll talk about it. You see, this is his face. He was beatified by Benedict XVI. And then on Sunday, we'll be in Turin at the Pacific Hotel Fortino. We'll be in the Fortino, you understand? We'll take refuge in the Fortino against all our enemies. We'll shoot arrows. As soon as a Bergoglio, a Variano, and or an 𝐥'𝐴CUM arrives, we'll put on our armor and shoot arrows from the small bridge. There will be the relic of Don Bosco for those who were not able to come to Savigliano last week, and then the drawing of a statue free of charge. Enjoy the free sketch of a statue of Francis and a lovely statue of Don Bosco. I remind you of the most important appointment next Tuesday in Verona, Feast of Our Lady of Lourdes, which 4 years after the declaration of the dogma in that dark and damp grotto, which will become one of the most emblematic places of the Catholic faith, appeared to a young mountain girl named Bernadette Suberus. And in one of the 18 apparitions, finally, on the 25th of March, 1858, Our Lady says that she was immaculately conceived. In the Pyrenean dialect, Jesus, the Immaculate Conception, I am the Immaculate Conception, like the Pope. Pius IX, whose memory we celebrate, had proclaimed the dogma. It seems to me that I have said everything, the introductory notes that are always very important. It's a logbook. Practically, you know that. The captain of a ship comes aboard, and then every day he takes stock of the situation. So Commander Don Minutella writes the logbook every morning and then tackles the catechism. The perpetual rosary process will begin at midnight on the 11th, that is, between the 10th and the 11th. The perpetual rosary will last at least 1 year. We'll carry it on for a year. And of course, subscribe by contacting the WhatsApp number of Simona, the contact person for Lombardy. And what I'd like to say to all of you, my dears, is that it's a very important initiative. Then if you have problems keeping to that time, there, especially the night ones, let me know in time and it can be changed. What's important is that there's this movement of scattered times. As long as the perpetual rosary is guaranteed every day, 24 hours a day. It's very, very important, and we must offer it for Our Lady's intentions and for the triumph of her Immaculate Heart. Right, now let's move on to today's episode, which, as you'll now see from the window title, is called Ratzinger-Von Balthasar, to save faith together. Right? So I've talked about this several times in my meetings. Santi Cafe's morning show, by now it's a column that has dealt with several things. And everyone pretends to ignore it, everyone follows it. This is certain, from the Bergoglian ultra-traditionalists, to the 𝐴 to the traditionalists, to the conservatives, everyone follows in the sense that they pay attention to what I say, saints and coffee. And so everyone knows that I am a disciple and I boast of von Balthasar. Not unfortunately in existential terms, because he died in 1988, and I was just a lad, an adolescent. So I haven't, unfortunately, I regret it, but God has his designs, had the chance to meet him personally, this Swiss theologian who died precisely in 1888, 2 days before becoming a cardinal. This theologian, von Balthasar, he had been a Jesuit for a long time, and then later he left the Jesuit order because he followed a mystic, Adrian von Speer, on whom John Paul II wanted a study conference to be held in Rome. John Paul II, regarding the emergence of mystics and various mystics, we're talking about a high-level one that I was able to study, because my doctoral thesis, with the highest marks and the rare privilege of being published in full, the Gregorian one, it's on von Balthasar. On the eschatological mission, however, after studying it, von Balthasar discovered there is more Speyer than von Balthasar. He followed this mystic for years, alongside whom he then formed a reality, the Johannesgemeinschaft, that is, the community of St. John, an institute of secular life, consecrated men and women that still exists today. Some are even bishops, the Bishop of Lourdes. Of years past, which apparently was another thing, he didn't conform, and for this reason he couldn't do it, evidently. A good Balthasarian, as, for example, myself, good, Balthasarian, yes, doesn't conform at all to the Bergoglian course. It's a contradiction in terms. So this photo that you see is rare, This is von Balthasar in front, and behind him is the mystic Adrian von Speyer, this doctor who will die in 66, making a series of predictions and initiatives that will go down in history. One day, von Speyer will be spoken of as a great mystic, precisely, beyond her mystical experiences, which I'm quite familiar with, even though many of her writings are not translated into Italian. She had visions in which she spoke, commented on the gospel of St. John. And now that I'm commenting on Who Has My Book, The Eagle and the Sun Knows It, there are many references to von Speyer and von Balthasar. Because she saw St. John coming to comment on the gospel to her and von Balthasar, he would sit next to her and write an amazing dialogue. However, there are a couple of episodes in 𝐤𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵 remain, in my opinion, emblematic. I'll mention two in particular, or three. The first, von Balthasar, resounding prophecy. You volunteered as victim, and think in spirit, in bilocation, during the Second World War. She went to comfort the soldiers on the front, the German soldiers, because we always rightly are made to make, as they say, the fences. So all the Nazis were all in hell. They all went to hell. It's not true. And all the French, English, American allies, they were all good heroes of the faith. But it's not like that at all. Not at all. Soldiers were those, and soldiers were those. And so there is a scene, obviously, look, it is said that two who were in the woods, an ally and a Nazi, meet. One starts shouting, the other shouts, "Who's going to shoot first?" You understand the situations they were in? They shot each other, they both died. I think hand in hand they went to heaven. I'd like to think so. Anyway, von Speyer used to take it upon herself. The pain, fear, and anguish of these people. Father Balthasar recounts it all, sadly not in Italian. Unfortunately, I also attended the Balthasar house, where in Rome Ratzinger wanted this house of studies. And there I got a couple of meetings, even presenting my book, published by the Maria Publishing House, commissioned by Cardinal Angelo Scola, a disciple of von Balthasar. So, when he learned that there was this doctoral thesis that had received the highest marks at the Gregorian, he permitted its publication, and my volume, The Christological Trinitarian Eschatology of Balthasar, was produced there. This is Henry F's first, who, in the year 1968, suddenly becomes blind and finds himself confined to a wheelchair. She had implored von Balthasar for her entire life to leave her on the street. Von Balthasar stays until the end. When he was about to die, Adrian von Speyer made a prophecy to von Balthasar. He said to him, "You, throughout your whole existence, must accept persecution. You will be persecuted." And so it went almost to the very end. Almost to the very end. And yet, when you're promoted, when you receive honors from the church, prepare yourself, because it's a sign that we're coming for you. Thus says Elio Guerriero, one of von Balthasar's foremost scholars. He died to avoid becoming cardinal, because that's how it went. Who, as we'll now see, became friends with Ratzinger. These two worked together, had lunch. Ratzinger recounts that even while they washed dishes together, made coffee, he just kept talking about dogma and faith. When Ratzinger asked his friend, von Balthasar, a very beautiful friendship, in some ways even touching, he was called the most cultured man of the century by Henry de Lubac. When we talk about Henry de Lubac, I don't know where to begin. They used to study together, and they blazed a new trail. Henry de Lubac, to whom Ratzinger later connected, and Ratzinger converted to the true faith, no longer the modernist one, thanks to the encounter with Henry de Lubac in Lyon. And he turned to him in a new place. He initiated this rediscovery of the Church Fathers, otherwise unknown, except through Thomas Aquinas. There was an outdated theology, one that had steadily degenerated into a mire of quicksand that appeared to engulf all reason, leaving no room for nuance, and, notably, rather formal. It was placed, in fact, von Speyer's prophecy came true, because in 1988, during Lent, near Easter, the Holy Father John Paul II, on the indication undoubtedly of Ratzinger, communicated by telephone to von Balthasar that in the consistory of June 88, 28th of June, 88, he would create him a cardinal. Von Balthasar's family, he'd spent the last 20 years of his life with them, would travel, he'd get invited to give lectures, he'd go there, deliver the lecture. He was a man of integrity, not very open to relationships, not very easy to approach. His family, after this announcement, see that he doesn't give it with particular joy or lightness, but as if he's withdrawing into himself. In short, they were talking about preparing, as you can imagine, the chasuble, the robes, etc. 2 days before becoming a cardinal, he dies. The prophecy of von Speyr came true, who had told him, "We will come and get you when the church honors you." Von Speyr's other action was to push von Balthasar into a friendship with 𝐕. Just think how God can work in the church through hidden souls. Von Balthasar is repeatedly told, as only women know how to do, mystics or not, they start chattering, as they say in Sicilian, that is, to insist, to become friends with Ratzinger, to help him, to help us form a partnership between the two of them, because they have to found a magazine. And this magazine still exists today. I had the honor of publishing an article, only but not nothing. Yes, one, in the highly prestigious magazine Multilingual Communion. In 2008, I believe, I published in the magazine commissioned by von Balthasar and Ratzinger an article by von Balthasar himself. And they, Ratzinger and von Balthasar, launched a new magazine after the council called 𝐏𝐼𝐴𝐼𝐿. Von Speyr had told von Balthasar that she would succeed in this work because God wants it, and it serves as a counterbalance, as a reply to the magazine. Just imagine how true mystics pay attention to these things. 𝐏𝐼𝐴𝐼𝐴, which he had wanted. Just imagine Karl Rahner, the true antagonist of von Balthasar. All right? The true antagonist of von Balthasar. And so this magazine becomes prestigious. Ratzinger and von Balthasar begin a real collaboration, let's say a managerial and entrepreneurial collaboration in inverted commas of the magazine. They worked tirelessly together for years, so much so that, as we'll see later, von Balthasar's funeral will be held at the end of June, I believe the 30th of June, in Lucerne, where he rests in a tomb in the atrium of a church, beautiful Lucerne. Cardinal Ratzinger, prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, will go there in 1988 to hold the funeral. And in the homily in German, obviously I asked for it to be translated for me. I had the good fortune of someone who translated it for me. At a certain point, Ratzinger, who is not one to easily give in to praise, useless and excessive, or rather, he was extremely rigorous. Listen to what he says at von Balthasar's funeral. It's already a canonization, listen. He was a true master of faith. We're talking about von Balthasar, and Ratzinger said so. He was a true master of faith, a sure guide to the sources of living water, a witness to the Word, from whom we can learn about Christ, learn about life. To live Christ. This sentence from the letter to the Philippians sums it all up in the end. The entire journey of his life, since this is the truth of his intimate biography, we can be sure that it holds true. For him also the following phrase, "To die is gain." Let us pray to the Lord that he may give us the grace to keep alive in us the great witness of this his servant, to continue his work. Where we learn that von Balthasar as a young man could never decide to become a priest. He could never decide what to do. So, at a certain point, a rather emblematic episode occurs. Let's see if I can find it here. Let's have a look at his vocation. It's a calling you're born with. I hope no one's shocked. Given the references, in many cases, even autobiographical ones, with a phrase, a simple phrase, it changes his life. He was walking in the Black Forest when suddenly he heard a quiet voice speaking to him. I can't find it, unfortunately, but still, a voice. And this is my book, by the way, which I wrote on von Balthasar. I would be available, or maybe he is also sold out, like so many others. Not books, people. Hans Urs von Balthasar, subtitle, Prophet, Mystic, Theologian. It's a small and popular book because of von Balthasar. There exist only sectorial tomes that make him an aristocrat of the faith. My merit, another one of the merits of Cari Domino, is to have made him quite understandable to people. Simple. Anyway, he strolled without deciding what to do. And at one point, while strolling through the Black Forest, he hears a voice that says, "You are not meant for yourself. You are meant for a work." So he becomes a priest and converts at the moment. Here I'll read you the exact words. "Even today," says von Balthasar, "after 30 years I could find again, on a remote path in the German Black Forest, not far from Basel, the tree under which I was struck by a sudden flash of lightning." What exactly was it about? He adds that he distinctly heard a voice. Utterances, as St. John of the Cross teaches us, have several possibilities. They're headphones, inner ones, phonetic too. For example, do you know the story of that French priest who died and then came back to life, a spiritual son of Padre Pio, who in the confessional at Sacré-Cœur in Paris, Padre Pio spoke through him? He told it himself on Rai 1 to Bruno Vespa. And that priest who was shot by the Algerian militia, and he went to be ordained at the throne of God, and there the Lord told him to return to earth. Then he went to Padre Pio, whose spiritual son he was, and Padre Pio said it went like this. He was there and knew all. He went to France, and when he would hear confessions, sometimes it was Padre Pio speaking through him. So there are also phonetic translations. Here, this is the headset, von Balthasar's one. The Lord says these precise words to him. "You are called, you will not serve. There are those who will use you." We could also be the ones serving them. That is, the small remnant, even when you don't know it, is indebted to the work of von Balthasar because it takes heart. Therefore, the rosary, the devotion, the spirituality that is decisive. But this is needed to fight the damned enemies. And this Don Nutella, whom so many fear because no one has ever wanted to make themselves available for a confrontation. Once I did it there, on that television program, I wiped the floor with him. It's due to the study of von Balthasar's texts. In a moment, I will tell you why the progressives and the traditionalists reject it. They're not Catholic. I clearly understand what you mean, and got it? Von Balthasar ingratiates himself with traditionalists, who, being the self-righteous squares that they are, insist that von Balthasar live, I hope, patience. The line went down. I'm sorry because it was the thick of it, the reflection. I was saying that traditionalists consider von Balthasar a heretic. Now I say, do you understand that these are the traditionalists who pretend to be Catholic? They pretend to be Catholic because John Paul II made him a cardinal. But in von Balthasar's case, it meant testing his theological work, which I don't have time to go into in detail, naturally. Here in a few words, I want to get to these decisive passages. The traditionalists reject it, just like the progressives. Have you ever heard the progressives, the long-standing ones, sympathize with von Balthasar? Not at all. The traditionalists make him say that, for example. For the traditionalists, he was an innovator. Von Balthasar, but in my opinion, they've never read it. Von Balthasar received a special prize from the Orthodox world awarded in that year. In the 80s, yes, because he died in 88. The early 80s, if I remember correctly. Look what my translation skills are like. He received an honorary award for enabling the rediscovery of the Greek fathers, particularly Origen. It's absolutely true. The whole church today that speaks of Origen, that speaks of Saint Maximus the Confessor, is indebted to von Balthasar, who translated the originals into German and then allowed the translation into other languages. Look how truly unworthy many of the traditionalists are. These traditionalists who feel they're the guardians of the faith, we need to go back to the 50s. When I had started to talk about von Balthasar, I remember it very well. One of those on the radio, those with weapons, I won't add the name because I don't do advertising, was able to lie to me, to publish a photo of von Balthasar, that since he had gone to the United States to hold a conference, in a moment of recreation, as I have it too, he had gone to see Mickey Mouse. You will have been asked, as happens to me, to take a photo, and there he is hugging Mickey Mouse. They published that photo to discredit him. Same. When you can't address the content, you attack the form. Right back to us, the words that the divine voice speaks to the young von Balthasar. You are called, you will not serve. There are those who will use you. You mustn't make plans, for you are but a small tile, a small piece in a mosaic, carefully placed since long ago. You're of no use. Who will make use of you? Who has used von Balthasar? Those who are using von Balthasar are Don Minutella, for example. If many of you believe, as I think, that Don Minutella is carrying out a mission, well, also find the accreditation of this prophecy made to von Balthasar. You won't serve, others will use you. My enemies are very restrained because my enemies know it, so much so that we challenge him, we invite him. He refuses, but how? I'm always ready to do it. But I'm the one who refuses. No, and because they know that Gloria, dramatic and theological, has 3 sections. And then also the monographs of the species, because today the doctrine is polluted. One can easily understand who Bergoglio is and where he wants to get to if they have read the writings of von Balthasar. The vision on the church is clear. Balthasar's ecclesiology is simply extraordinary because it is imbued with the church fathers. Now let's go to the decisive passage from my book, 𝐤𝐻𝐻 Balthasar. Seems completely sold out. Only a few copies remain. Anyone interested, just ask. Prophet, mystic, theologian, on page 35 with this title, Joseph Ratzinger and Hans von Balthasar, A Mutual and Faithful Esteem. In the notes released on the 11th of April, 2019, written to contribute to the dramatic issue of pedophilia. In the church, Benedict XVI, quoting his friend von Balthasar, describes him in an unusual way, in inverted commas, the great theologian. Never sidelined by Ratzinger. When he quoted some theologian, he said, a great theologian, with the indefinite article. Whereas here, in the notes, the ones thrown in Bergoglio's face regarding the problem of pedophilia, Ratzinger feels obliged to say to whom he offers the merit of his thorough examination. When von Balthasar calls, it will be in these public notes, so you can go and see the great theologian. Always measured in his terms, here it seems that our friend Ratzinger wants to offer a model of theological thought, that of von Balthasar, which could serve as an antidote to the progressive and neo-modernist, globalist and relativist monopoly of Karl Rahner, which was imposed on everyone following the Second Vatican Council. The esteem and friendship were mutual. Even von Balthasar during the post-conciliar years. But why am I getting emotional? He nourished towards Ratzinger, first as a theologian, then as prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, great esteem and deep friendship. The two collaborated together in writing some small volumes that aim to clarify the orientations of the Council. It's called Why I'm Still in the Church, Why I'm Still a Christian. It's a booklet written by four hands, Ratzinger by Balthasar, and to clarify certain aspects of so-called anonymous Christianity, that of Rahner, who becomes the main director of the Reform cabin. Ratzinger will lend his expertise, as he said a short while ago, to the magazine 𝐏𝐼𝐴, conceived by von Speyer and created in a short time and with few resources by Balthasar himself. They will meet regularly, spending some of their summer holidays together as well. On the other hand, geographically speaking, they're both German-speaking, even though one is Swiss and the other German, but still very close. We studied it in Freiburg, where von Balthasar had also been. Lucerne isn't very far from the area, let's say from Bavaria. In short, it's not very far. Ratzinger will have quite a bit of work, because, well, they used to meet every summer and be together. They had lunch together, for a period. Ratzinger will work tirelessly so that John Paul II makes him a cardinal when he dies. 2 days before receiving the cardinal's hat, he'll go and celebrate the funeral in Lucerne, giving a homily in German that moves by highlighting, even then, in 1988, the human and Christian qualities of von Balthasar. I'll read that passage out loud. He was a true master of faith, a sure guide to the sources of living water, a witness to the word. Benedict XVI defines him as the great theologian, thus wanting to bring him to the attention of the whole church, while the Bergoglian storm rages. So Ratzinger suggests who to turn to in order to withstand Bergoglio's heretical storm. Even the friend bade farewell to the then Cardinal Ratzinger. When I'm talking about von Balthasar, in an interview with Vittorio Messori, which in these days finally comes out, these days here in the book, I wrote this in when I was young, 2019. Just imagine. So, in an interview given to Vittorio Messori in the midst of the chaos of the post-conciliar period, where the progressive drives proceeded hand in hand with those of the traditionalists under the Wojtylian pontificate, of which Ratzinger was the mind, Balthasar praises the work of Ratzinger, stating without hesitation that the then prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith and personal friend had not been wrong about anything. So there is, as you can see, a sort of mutual veneration. Ratzinger, who's younger, so much so that he'll die much later, considerably younger, delivers a eulogy almost of beatification at the funeral of von Balthasar, a true master of faith, sure guide, witness to the word. But even von Balthasar, in the interview he gave to Vittorio Messori, speaks of Ratzinger like no other. Ratzinger calls him the great post-mortem theologian. While von Balthasar was still alive, Ratzinger called him someone who'd made no mistakes, coming from a great theologian. He made no mistakes, says von Balthasar. He's not mistaken at all. It's not a small matter. A shared friendship, then, is a mutual esteem that has something providential and prophetic about it. Providential, because Benedict XVI clearly indicates in Balthasar's thought and theology a sure way out, a fire escape from the relativistic inferno of theology. Post-conciliar. In theological circles, I remember when I arrived at the Gregorian, I've said this many times, the dean of the Faculty of Dogmatic Theology at the Gregorian asked the diocese. The bishop didn't grant it. I wasn't in his favor, because that's how things go in the church. Even now, it's not that because of Bergoglio, these things were already there. If the banquet wasn't in their favor, the cardinal didn't grant it. I can't find a reason. Another, even if God writes on crooked lines, maybe I would have gotten lost at the Gregorian. Who knows? So, costing what it may, however, certainly I wasn't in the Archbishop's good graces. I was one of his favorite pupils that they call from the Gregorian. To say, send him here, as if to say to Christ, imagine, if the Cardinal hadn't already sent him swimming to Rome, across the Tyrrhenian Sea instead, without my knowing it, I found out later. They already orchestrated a real maneuver with me back then. They will answer to God, because where there is God, there is transparency. One doesn't act that way. Think how it went. The Cardinal didn't tell me anything about the Gregorian calling. Listen, how you're doing, how I survived and keep going, only God knows. How many trials I've been through, seemingly insignificant, but if you think about it, that day I was at the Gregorian University. I went to Rome. I had to meet the dean. The dean tells me this thing, understand? I was told this, not by the diocese, not the bishop. But the bishop, cowardly, has me called, probably having learned that I wasn't aware, sitting among so many while I was leaving the Gregorian. He has me called by the auxiliary bishop, who now today is, for what, 60 years old, ill, not all there. Hear what he says. Hi, Alessandro, it's Carmelo. Hello, Alessandro, I'm Carmelo, the auxiliary bishop to a priest. Okay, hi, Alessandro, it's Carmelo. Listen, as soon as you get to Palermo, is the appointment ready? With all the birdies and the little flowers, these are phrases you can't forget anymore. With all the birdies and the little flowers. But I'm sorry, Your Excellency, what are you referring to? You don't know that you were made. I think I'm speaking now, I remember the title. So to say, excuse this autobiographical parenthesis, but to say that it is precise, because when I went to the Gregorian University, Professor Giovanni Domini, what a shame that he is dead, but from heaven he can confirm. He remained, quote-unquote, spellbound. He was a convinced Ratzingerian. He knew von Balthasar, but he'd never met a student. He told me so himself, he used to tell me, who spoke so confidently about von Balthasar, who possessed, let's say, Balthasarian theology. And in fact, when I used to visit him, he always, like the dean, his office was always full of people. Colleagues would get annoyed, because as soon as I arrived, without being asked, it happened a few times. In fact, then he died. Someone in the church who loved me, esteemed me. He really grew fond of me. I've realized that in the church I can be friends with those with whom there is a supernatural bond, not a human one, a supernatural one. I know I'm not an easy person. I realize that, but if you stick with me, then you find the positives. I mean, you have to love me to grasp even the aspects, and then anyway, the merit is there. It's not that I'm making it up, so let's get back to us, because we have to wrap up, but it's a nice page that we're dealing with today. It's no coincidence that when Pope Benedict resigned, traveling to Castel Gandolfo in those historic days of late February 2013, you remember by helicopter, he wanted to make it known that he was taking the texts of Von Balthasar with him. There's an interview by Father Tornielli with the Holy Father who is resigning, and he asks him what he's taking with him to Castel Gandolfo. He would have answered, who knows what. He answers by saying, the texts of Von Balthasar, I think that's how he said it. It's clear that we're sending a message, yet another new message in this church, which I'm leaving to understand that it's false. To understand that it's not the Catholic Church, you have to read the texts of Balthasar. If you read them, you'll realize that this one that Bergoglio leads cannot be the Catholic Church. This most unexpected eulogy I'm concluding, the 26th by Von Balthasar, and the notes, it's not, however, isolated. The Pope, in the book entitled Last Conversations, returns once again to Von Balthasar. In dialogue with the German journalist Peter Sewald, he repeatedly mentions the friendship. I'm traveling. If I were at home in my library, I would have picked up Last Conversations, which perhaps I brought with me anyway. On my travels, you can understand anyway. I would have read it. Anyway, look for it in this. In dialogue with the German journalist Peter Sewald, he repeatedly cites the friendship with the great Swiss theologian von Balthasar, dwelling on details, even personal ones. This is extremely peculiar because in several sectors of the Church, collateral to the traditionalist world, von Balthasar would be nothing less than suspected of heresy. I write, there, another autobiographical element. I myself have been able to verify this since I embarked on this apologetic mission. My doctoral thesis at the Gregorian University, which obtained the highest marks, was a defense against the accusation for which von Balthasar is considered heretical, that of the empty hell. We'll cover it at the book's end. I've shown that he never said such a thing, and that it was a dishonest maneuver, probably orchestrated by the Ranarians against him, as cold revenge for his tenacious opposition to the Ranarian and neo-progressive party. This was claimed, for example, by Father Cavalcoli, Giovanni Cavalcoli. I'm stunned. A Dominican theologian, in a quarrel with me in past years, accused me, he said, of being even more heretical, since I do nothing but appeal to theology, to the thought of combat. Excuse me, if A is B and B is C, then A equals C. If I'm a heretic, then so is Ratzinger. And that's why I'm so hated and feared. These are the real reasons. It's not just the full house. And when the journalists come, I dismantle them, I destroy them, I tear my enemies to pieces. And they know it. Because, you know, when Cassius Clay stepped into the ring, he wasn't called that. He was feared because he packed a punch. What was the name of that famous black boxer? I can't think of it. Got it? Donatella. Hi. Donatella is an excellent boxer in the ring. Got it? Father Cavalcoli, years ago, this is written in 2019. He will have done it in 2017, 2018, in 2017, 2018. He wrote an article, I believe, on the island of Patmos, around there, in which he said that Don Minutella is blatantly heretical because he continuously appeals to von Balthasar. But excuse me, Father Cavalcoli, if I am a heretic because I appeal to von Balthasar, even Benedict XVI, he's a heretic because the great theologian defines him as such. Or am I wrong? Or am I wrong? And so the progressives dumped him in von Balthas because he disappointed them, being such a brilliant mind. As the Bishop of Palermo said to me, and also Cardinal Burke, both incredible. Be careful, keep your eyes open, don't believe these. Such clear divisions, because then, in the end, Freemasonry brings them together for common interests. Because it is a fact, however, that I, from the Bishop of Palermo and Cardinal Burke, one hyper-progressive, hyper-Bergoglian, the other super-traditionalist. But I was told exactly the 7 things. Go ask Pope Francis. It's a shame that a mind like yours is at the service of another. If Lorifice tells me that in Palermo it might make some sense, at the limit, but that Burke repeats it to me in exactly the same terms, on the other hand, makes one ask more than one question. Where is the Catholic Church? Who really are the representatives of the Catholic Church today? You will not serve, others will make use of you. It's not that von Balthasar was predisposed to serving the small remnant, Ratzinger's choice to resign, to leave, opened the breach for the small Catholic remnant that was led by Don Minutella. History itself gives the answer. Even traditionalists have sidelined von Balthasar because they considered him a modernist theologian. Von Balthasar, theologian, modernist, these are idiots, I'm sorry to say it. Look what Ratzinger says, how moving the short but effective description he offers of von Balthasar to Peter Seybold says, a true aristocrat. Yes, this is the limit of von Balthasar. But I would have managed to meet him. If I had been there today, I would have gone to see him and insisted. A true aristocrat, says Ratzinger, who we know who he was, you know. Overtaken from von Balthasar, who played Mozart's symphonies, that von Balthasar wasn't normal, that one went from following Adrian von Speer to talking with St. John and St. Ignatius of Loyola to playing the magic flute without the score. Ratzinger, who was astonished, says it himself. Same. He remained astonished by the cultural preparation from Vieta to Freud, from Marx to St. Thomas Aquinas, from Schopenhauer to I don't know who else, to Schelling. He knew all the great voices of everyone. all the schools of thought of human history. A true aristocrat. Look what adds Ratzinger. Tall, slim, noble, and remarkably reserved, in the manner typical of the aristocracy. Yes, because he came from a noble family. And adds a decisive detail. If they told Daphne, we understood each other from the very first moment. He then defines Balthasar's theology. These are Ratzinger's words. A theology of the fathers, a spiritual vision that arises from faith and reflection, profound and new at the same time. But still, the traditionalists, since Pius XII had condemned the novelty of theology. Now, I don't have the time. This is becoming a lecture, so I hope our seminarians are listening to it, can listen to it, because these days they have exams, so hopefully they'll catch up. Someone let them know. I'd be pleased if they listened to it. He was criticized because with Henry de Lubac, the other giant, also made a cardinal, he was accused of creating a new theology. Yes, it was a new theology, and plus 12th, the condemnation. But as we were saying yesterday, popes are often misinformed. Prophets must always endure condemnation, which is later revoked. Wouldn't the popes be better off seeing things for themselves? No time. Well, then don't condemn. Sorry, it's right. Is it right or not? Yes, I understand that Cardinal Ottaviani is telling you that Father Henry de Lubac and Father von Balthasar, two Jesuits, by the way, are making up a story. Theology, but ask what it means and check for yourself. So what was this Nouvelle Théologie? You want to know what it was? It wasn't modernist. It was simply a direct retrieval of the Church Fathers, who up until that point had been read through St. Thomas Aquinas and the Summa Theologica. But you can't do theology with 13th century theology. Even Luther in the 1500s was complaining that this Thomas theology was too invasive. And he was right. Even Luther back then, he was right. It's a shame that he was disturbed, and so who knows what became of him. But von Balthasar says, when he begins to study theology, that he used to read the Fathers in secret. I also did at the Faculty of Logic in Palermo. One used to read texts in secret, because the quicksand of Thomism were sucking you in. You could see it was a theology. He was right. There was a need for a confrontation with modernity, the new philosophical sensibilities, etc. What a lovely speech, though. Ratzinger says von Balthasar's theology isn't academic stuff, which ultimately isn't useful for anything. It's absolutely true. It's not Rahner who writes that abstruse nonsense about anonymous Christianity and that other thesis. Now it escapes me. Transcendental anthropology. It's that sort of thing that's abstruse. In the end, they have nothing to do with reality. Ratzinger says that, on the contrary, von Balthasar's theology, which is very true, isn't a theology that reads it and then puts it down, but a synthesis of erudition, authentic professionalism, and profound spirituality. These characteristics, Ratzinger says, won me over. When Seewald asked him if there was an affinity with Balthasar, Benedict XVI replied, yes. And he adds, even though I couldn't compete with his erudition, what should I say? We are dwarfs who walk on the shoulders of giants. There's still some other detail, room for some other significant detail. He writes, Ferretti says, when we went to Mass, he always had a bundle of letters with him that he'd put in the post box. They were together, as I said, in summer. When they would come down from the house, there's a lot of my life in that. Ratzinger and von Balthasar descended. Who would ever have thought, for example, that these two gentlemen in suits and ties, because that's how it was done back then, would become key figures in the history of the Church, decisive ones. Only Don Minutella was missing, and he was behind them. So Ratzinger says that every morning, while they were going to Mass in that church where he was buried, there he, Ratzinger, was struck by a bundle of letters that every morning he put in the post box. He wrote them in the morning very early, but excuse me, but at 7 they admitted me. At which is this? Very early morning? No later than 4:30 in the morning is when great thinkers, great missionaries, personalities with a great vision of the Church are destined to sleep. Who wrote very early in the morning, in his beautiful handwriting, He had incredible fluidity in writing. He wrote books with remarkable ease, just as easily. Then Mrs. 𝐸𝐴𝐻, well, you must know that Ratzinger took the point of having Ingrid next to him, who was his secretary, from von Balthasar. I've never said this because it always slipped my mind. Von Balthasar had someone who collaborated with him, without whom he would not have been able to complete the work. She was a woman. His secretary was called Kapel Swiss, who remained by his side until his death, and who often took care of correcting the drafts, because he wrote them in one go. He was sure of her, so he entrusted her. Imagine the trust. There was great trust in this. He entrusted her with proofreading to see if there were any errors, because he couldn't do it alone otherwise. Mrs. 𝐸𝐴𝐻, his secretary, checked them, says Ratzinger, from top to bottom. She corrected any errors and prepared them for the hall. And I should do the same, basically. I should do that too, I must do that too, because otherwise I won't manage. I write the lyrics, I throw them there, and then it's normal that if you write there are mistakes, and so whoever collaborates with you has to. Sevold also asks if Benedict XVI might have known von Speyr, the mystic who von Balthasar followed from 1940 to 1966, the year of her death. Ratzinger replies with a gentle no, not a sharp no, as if to distance himself, but a gentle no. And he adds that, deep down, it was really him, his friend Hans, who was already a mystic. My dears, I'll be waiting for you this evening at 9 o'clock for the Rosary Prayer and the families, in this year, of the Rosary 2025. God willing, connecting with Australia, with Yes, and with Melbourne. Let's hope we can get through. Let's pray the connection works. And then I remind you of tomorrow's appointments in Genoa and the day after tomorrow in Turin. Tomorrow at 4 p.m. at the Holiday Inn on Via Milano, and the day after tomorrow, Sunday, in Turin at the Pacific Hotel, with Don Bosco's relic and a statue draw. I'd also like to remind you that tomorrow evening at 9 o'clock, the catechesis series entitled Small and Great Heroes of the Faith will be broadcast, with the story of Blessed Zeffirino Nomuncura, who died at 18 years old.